What was the Gulf War? It was a war fought mainly between Iraq and the United States. In the morning of August 2nd, Iraqi T-27 tanks attacked Kuwait. In merely just under 5 hours, Iraq had already taken over Kuwait. Well, why did Iraq do this? We're gonna look at the causes and the consequences of the Gulf War. Any discussions about the Gulf War would all begin with a man called Saddam Hussein. Saddam Hussein was the president of Iraq, and Saddam Hussein expanded the Iraqi military forces incredibly. He spent lots and lots of money in improving the Iraqi military forces. He invested money on nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons to gain an edge on the surrounding countries, to gain power and control. Iraq could basically choose to conquer any of the countries nearby, whenever he wanted. The only problem was that Iraq did not have enough oil itself. It had to borrow oil from neighboring countries. This problem elevated in 1990 when Kuwait and other major oil places began to increase the production, thus lowering the prices. Iraq at that time was using oil to profit from, to balance the $90 billion debt from the Iraq-Iran war. Iraq looks to Kuwait in raising the oil prices. Instead, it plunges, bringing Iraq down along with it. Furthermore, Iraq had also suspected Kuwait in stealing oil from Iraq by drilling diagonally across the border. To solve this problem, Saddam Hussein decided to take over Kuwait. After capturing Kuwait, Saddam Hussein himself had already 20% of the world's oil. He stated that Kuwait had been returned to the motherland, Iraq. Saudi Arabia could have helped Kuwait try and gain their independence back by fighting Iraq, but they were not so confident. Iraq had sent more troops into Kuwait and securing it. By August 6th, Iraq had almost 11 divisions situated in Kuwait, awaiting the world's response. Intelligence at that time gathered that the army of Iraq was so big that they could have just taken over Saudi Arabia just as easily as they took over Kuwait. Saudi Arabia, knowing that trouble was coming for them, had called their strongest and closest ally, the United States. George Bush deployed support on Saudi Arabia's soil in order to defend it, calling this operation Desert Shield. What type of war was this? This was a war of aggression, imperialism, nationalism, war of resources, and economic reasons. War of aggression. Saddam Hussein was very aggressive in his approach to Kuwait, taking over Kuwait and causing the world to react. War of imperialism. Saddam Hussein wanted to control Kuwait in order to control the oil prices, because he knew that the world depended on oil. War of nationalism. The moment that Saddam Hussein took over Kuwait, he challenged the world, trying to prove that his army was the strongest. War of resources. Iraq needed to control the oil prices in order to balance their $90 billion debt. Economic reasons. As discussed before, Iraq was $90 billion in debt. Saddam Hussein was recently in war with Iran. This was a long and hard war, but in the end, it was a stalemate. After this war, the Iraqi army overruled any other armies nearby in the Middle East. Why did the US get involved? Well, the US knew that if Iraq also conquered Saudi Arabia, they would have taken over 40% of the world's oil reserves. With so much power in the hands of Saddam Hussein, who knows what he could have done. Torture was also reported from Kuwait, and the United States had to get involved. Furthermore, the world has heard about Iraq improving the military, CIA estimated that Iraq had almost developed nuclear weapons. Even today, Iraq spends 35% of their money on the army. Consequently, nowadays, there are no-fly zones above Iraq. Huge damage was done to Iraq after the war. Destruction from missiles had destroyed many infrastructures in Iraq. One of the consequences were that the Iraqi population had gone down after the war. The living standards were very poor. The years after, the electricity was only a quarter of what they had before the war. The missiles had also destroyed the water treatment facilities. It caused sewage to flow into the Tigris River. The Tigris River was where civilians drank water from. This resulted in disease spreading all over Iraq. Funds were provided by the western side of the world to help aid Iraq. But instead, Saddam Hussein used this money to help stabilize the military. The United States requested to search and investigate the Iraqi weaponry. The Iraqis never fully cooperated. The reason was that they had suspected the UN were spying on them. This proved to be partly true later on. In 1998, the UN reports that due to poor living standards, annually 90,000 people die in Iraq. The Iraqis state that the United States staying in the Iraqi soil was a very bad move, as this gave the Arab world a negative image to the United States. A group called the United Nations Special Commission was created in order to monitor the Iraqis' movement in weaponry. During the war, the US used many advanced technology of theirs, using homing missiles, heat-seeking devices, and very pinpoint accurate missiles. This helped the casualties to a minimum. The main missiles that are used were the AIM-9 Sidewinder. This was a heat-seeking short-range air-to-air missile. The AGM-114 Hellfire. This was an anti-tank laser-guided missile. The AGM-88 Harm. This is an anti-radiation air-to-surface attack. It hones in on radar emissions. There was one friendly fire accident. The Alarm Missile. This missile was guided to destroy enemy radar. It can stop itself if the enemy radar disappears using a parachute. The BGM-71 TOW. This was a tube-launched, optically tracked, anti-tank, wire-guided missile. The success from advanced weaponry from the United States had awoken Chinese up. People's Republic of China, which was many ways similar to Iraq, had decided to improve on the military and modernize the People's Liberation Army after seeing the success from the United States. In the end, Iraq gets overruled and withdraws from Kuwait, and Kuwait finally regaining its independence.